Hello and welcome to the Rudimentality podcast number 2, featuring my man and yours, Tom Reimer.
Hello.
Tom was my tech in 1998 at the St. Cloud All-City Drumlines when we first met, and we have been bumping into each other ever since around the MPA, Minnesota Percussion Association circuit, Minnesota Brass, etc., etc. So Tom, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Cool. So let's start at the beginning, and we'll just kind of see where things go from there. So, 98, you're still at South St. Paul High School?
Just graduated.
Graduated, okay. Came and teched at St. Cloud All-City. Was that your first tech job?
That was my very first teaching position. I think it was actually 99, too.
Was it 99 as well? Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So, Jay Cooper Smith,
yep.
who gets, in Minnesota, he gets everybody their first gig.
That's right.
As far as winter drumline goes. No, Jay gave me an opportunity to tech the quad line. We had a pretty killer staff. Nick Marino was on staff. Ben Chamberlain was on staff. So those are guys, both of their resumes started there and kept on going, and they're still being built very impressively. So.
Yep, and then Ben's actually reached out of Minnesota. He's down in Arkansas.
Yes,
correct?
He's at the University of Arkansas. He's a band director there. It's a big time gig. SECs. I mean, Ben was always, class act, super good at motivating and breaking things down. He was a big time influence on me as an educator.
Very cool. For sure. So, what did you take away from that first teaching gig at St. Cloud?
That it's hard to teach, especially when kids have a different level of ability or aptitude than. I mean, usually when we get into teaching, it's because we had an aptitude for playing first, and then that's like the most logical next progression, rather than we go play quads for a living. Like that's just not an option, or go play snare for a living. There are tiny options out there, but mostly you go and you teach. So I learned quickly that when kids are not percussionists or just they're at a different level, that you have to reapproach the instrument, and you have to look at kind of like the fundamentals of the instrument. You have to decide what you teach in what order and how to get kids to succeed. I think we did to an extent, but it was bumpy. It was bumpy.
I would agree. Having been a part of that line, it was. Well, that was my first year of winter drumline too, so I was completely new to the activity. Had played trumpet for 3 or 4 years up to that point, and had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I was strapped on fifth bass, and watch out.
Yeah.
But very interesting. So how, off of that, you're now teaching at, Minnetonka High School here in Minnesota, as well as
Eastview.
Yeah.
So the 2 fall gigs
that
I'm involved with. I teach with Nate Wright out at Eastview. He's kind of like the head percussioner. Him and Barry Peterson, Ryan Schmidt, Crit staff. And in Minnetonka, Rebecca Allen and I teach there, along with Lance Saxrud and James Boscromish. So kind of a AAA band, big band, and a single A band, little band. It's great. They're unique, and they're both excellent programs. Eastview is like established as an excellent program, and Minnetonka is. They just need someone to steer the ship and show them where to go, where the activity can go.
Let's see, 14 years separate that very first teaching gig, and then what you're doing now, which is scary for me to think about too. We're getting kind of old, man.
Ridiculous.
But what have you seen over the years as far as the students? Are they changing when they come into a program, or do you think it's more program specific, like kids that come through a very strong elementary and middle school program? They just kind of have it together by the time they get into those high school marching programs. So do you find that there's kind of a general change in kids, how they approach the instrument, how they approach the activity, their emotions and attitudes? Have you had to make adjustments for that?
I think kids are kids. I don't think that there is like a sea change of their mentality or whatever from 99 to present day. I've learned more, I guess. So like I just observe more. The thing that resonates over and over again is when there is a good middle school band director, there is a good high school drumline. Or when there is percussion training happening in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that that time period developmentally, your mean level of musicians are going to be much higher than a lot of places. I mean, I think just drumline up here in Minnesota anyway, a lot of the groups, they don't have that training happening. I mean, they have programs, but that oftentimes you'll have a wind band director who is a wind first band director, or there's interest, but they get a lot of their fundamental rudiment training and percussion training from their drumline instructors. I think that's pretty common up here, not from a percussion-oriented band director. I think there are other places in the country where there's maybe more of a commitment to music education, and they get that exposure to a percussion-first director at an earlier age. So, and that happens around here too. I think there's a disconnect between the programs that have those percussion directors at the middle school level and the schools that have winter drum lines. For some reason, we haven't quite converged like some other areas have. So.
Right. Well, and what I find interesting, this actually happens to be topical because I went to an ORF workshop today, which is focused primarily on elementary and middle school music teaching methods, and it's almost entirely based in singing, body movement, and percussion. Two of those three things are extremely present, obviously, in the WGI circuit or indoor drumline, and now marching band, drum corps has moved way out into more of a performance art thing versus strap drums on a bunch of kids and have them run in circles on a field. So what really struck me this morning was, how is it possible that we have all these systems in place at a very young age? I'm talking, preschool to kindergarten even. Kids are playing on these piccolo xylophones, they're holding hand drums, they've got a shekaré in their right hand, and yet somehow, even with all this training in place, we get to this landscape that is just barren, like somewhere around that 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and I can't for the life of me figure out why it is that we can't make it work here versus places like, let's say, Texas, or like a good example is Dartmouth, the school district out where Tom Monks is teaching and sets that curriculum from the very beginning, kind of like we were talking about earlier before we started recording, kind of builds the progression out. And obviously there's a lot more hope currently with a lot of the young kids graduating high school, going off to college, and being really interested in the instruction aspect of the activity. So I'm definitely praying that over the next couple of years things start to kind of speed up and accelerate in that direction, and then we start to see kind of a groundswell where these kids are getting more access and opportunity at a younger age. I know that we at Minnesota Brass, even this past summer, we've done some of that, reaching out to the community, playing some standstill performances, doing little almost mini workshops to a certain extent. So
yeah, I think there are different factors that go into that. Funding, I think, is primary, and then I think connecting to the community is a great place to start, especially when you're talking about like an independent organization like Minnesota Brass or any one of the independent lines that we have. We have a good quantity of independent lines, and also some super high quality independent winter drum lines here up in Minnesota. So I think, I guess I don't know what happens. What are the main reasons for that disconnect from that really young age, where kids bang on stuff. A 5-year-old is going to be a musician. It's very rare when they start hitting pots and pans. Right. It's like the cliched thing almost. But that happens. Or they hum. Yep. Like, I was a hummer.
Yep.
Can we rewind the podcast?
Take that back.
And no, you know what I mean.
Phrasing time.
Yeah, absolutely. So that sort of thing, though. So you see those skills at a very young age, and I don't know. I guess I don't think that our circuit, speaking of Minnesota, like MPA or just like Minnesota marching, I don't think it's necessarily behind too many other circuits. I just think that I think every circuit has its own specifics, like geographically, socioeconomically, like so many giant factors feed into it. Right. I've talked to you about like the weather. Yeah. Like just like college baseball is all on the southern and west coast on that rim, just because they get to be outside and play baseball.
Yeah, exactly.
That is actually something that really I think informs the drumline thing, because your outdoor years get developed 12 months a year when you're out in California, as opposed to drumming inside is totally different than drumming outside.
Absolutely.
And if you drum outside all the time, you know that level of cleanliness, and then you go inside, it's got to feel pretty easy. You got to feel kind of confident almost, like, no problem. I have a little bit more room for error here.
Right.
Great, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, it really takes the pressure off to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think winter groups from up here go out there and they get into that giant room, and it's the biggest room they've ever been in, the driest environment they've ever been in, and they're like, holy crap, every little tick, I can hear every little tick.
Yep.
So it's, I think that's kind of an underrated concept that I don't know if I have an answer as to how to solve that.
I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there as far as the Minnesota groups going out to WGI. I've taken the St. Cloud All-City Drumline out in independent A class 2 years now. And the second year, there was a definite change. The students that had made the first trip knew what they were getting into, and they could talk to the other students about, here's what to expect, don't freak out when you walk out there, and there's literally 10 people at the prelims performing,
right.
Or semis or whatever it happens to be.
I was there for it.
Yep, that's right.
I was one of 10 last year.
And it was, God, it was scary. But the first year, I just remember the looks, and we had the fortunate or unfortunate draw, depending on how you look at it, of having River City Rhythm, who's another independent group, recently was promoted to open class this past season at WGI National Championships. And they happened to go on immediately before us in prelims.
Okay.
And this is a group, for those of you that aren't familiar, River City Rhythm at that time had probably 35, 40 kids, very strong program. It was their only their third year out. But they had really ramped up quickly, and some of our students knew their students, or their members, I should say, since they're an independent group, and they were kind of friends. But as soon as they went out and just filled this huge, Nutter Center with sound, immediately all of my kids got this look on their face like, oh crap, how are we going to follow that? And then you open the curtain and they look out and they heard all this applause, and then they see that there's only 12 people in the stand, and they're like, oh man, what's happening right now?
Right.
And it was a good experience though. For me, definitely, it was my first time out to Dayton in 2011, and it really opened my eyes that you need to think differently. Like, even when you're in these tiny little 300-seater high school gyms in central Minnesota, you need to be planning ahead. You need to be thinking about that end of the road when you get into that big arena and you have to fill a space with, let's say, 17 bodies we had that year. And it's fascinating to me. And actually, I would love to get your opinion. Let's talk a little bit more about the MPA circuit. Those of you that don't know, Tom is the head judge for the Minnesota Percussion Association. Took on that role, don't let me get it wrong, 2 years ago now?
Yes.
Okay. And
no, this was my first year.
This was your first.
Yep,
I'm sorry.
Yep,
first year's head judge. Yep. Previously.
Probably had that locked and loaded.
Yeah. We'll go back. We'll scratch that out. And the circuit has been pretty healthy the last couple of years. And I know we talked before about getting into kind of some of the differences between what happens in MPA and then what you see at WGI, and then taking some of those characteristics back. So I would love to get kind of a compare and contrast going between what we see in MPA and have traditionally seen versus what we see in the national circuit.
Sure. I think some of the values that we have had here that don't always transfer would be, there's a high level of overall, like, again, that mean musicianship, like every member of the ensemble contributes, which is fantastic. I think it's a great ethic. But we've kind of lacked in having particular sections be really exemplary. I think it's the difference between the fact that that's like a national competition, where you go out there and you hope to or expect to be kind of wowed not necessarily by an entire line, but by a particular section of a line.
Definitely.
At least we're talking about something that I think is rewarded out there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, well, really both classes, probably more in the scholastic. I think in independent, there's a little bit higher level of integration. I think maybe because the membership's more mature. I guess I'm not 100% on that, but like people go out there and they remember a couple years ago it was Chino Hill Snare Line, and it was just like, I can't believe that those are high school kids.
Motivate.
Yeah,
that was a show when it was like, oh
yeah.
my God.
And I think part of that, especially in class, in Scholastic, is there are a ton of groups.
Mm-hmm.
Like in A, it's hard to distinguish yourself. I think the goal of most of the staffs out there is that they want to distinguish themselves either from a design standpoint or from, I think the musicianship, like showing technical skill is probably the easiest.
Mm-hmm.
I should say easiest, but is the most obvious thing that I don't think that we've necessarily rewarded here in the circuit. Like I think of years past where a particular section of a battery was super good, but the show had some design limitations to it,
mm-hmm.
and it was kind of always beaten by a more mature production that maybe had like a lower level of musicianship at the top end.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah,
so that's probably the biggest difference that I can think of between the two. I mean, there are other differences, like we don't really have a grasp on the electronics,
mm-hmm.
How we integrate it, and how proficient we are. There are just a few groups up here, I think, that really do it well.
And that information is almost like it's in the secret garden. Like
right.
There's 3 dudes in the state that really know how to make sound work and like have the budget to get the kind of equipment necessary to make that happen.
Which is huge.
Yeah, and you really need both of those things, because I think we both know plenty of groups that have a killer sound system, but if you're cranking out samples that are really lo-fi, or you have somebody, operating the board that doesn't really have a complete grasp on sound design, let's say, or,
totally.
Live mixing, it can completely negate that huge investment that you have.
Absolutely. So, I think I know the MPA is having, the name of the instructor escapes me. He's South Hills director.
Okay.
Up for instructor training.
Mm-hmm.
Every year they do like a one-day session where they have the MPA instructors come in, and we fly in someone, or the MPA flies in somebody. And South Hills does it better than, or as good as anybody.
Right.
The SPCA, the Southern California circuit, is at the foreground.
Absolutely.
Sure. They have many people down there who know it in and out. So.
Yeah.
I think that knowledge will start to disseminate up here more and more in the next year or two.
As it always does.
Yeah.
It starts on the West Coast usually, and then filters its way back, which would explain why there's so many freaking longboards all over my Bud State campus right now. Only took 25, 30 years for it to work its way to Minnesota, but man, it's grabbed on, and it's not going away from what I can tell. Anyway, so...
Cool. So that's some differences as far as MPA to WGI.
Yeah.
I think is where we started with that.
Absolutely. And now the proficiency of the players in the Minnesota series is definitely on the rise. Groups like Rochester.
Absolutely.
And they've been placing higher and higher every year. I want to say they were 14, 15 in 2011.
Yep.
This past year they're climbed up a spot or two.
Yeah, and they really had, they could have had a more locked-in performance. I think they had some electronics issues at their prelims performance, and they looked like they belonged in finals. My personal opinion.
Right.
It just wasn't the right. They just messed in their performance. Sorry if any of you Lord's alum or instructional staff is listening. I love what you're doing. I think they're a great program. They're one of the highlights. I'm always excited when I'm judging the show and I see them on the docket, because I know I'm going to hear some clean beats.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. That's one of those times where you stay in the gym a little bit longer after your group's done.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, Lee and Fitzy.
Yep, Lee Kruger.
Those guys do great work down there.
Amazing work, and for that's one of those instances. I speak with Andy Anker from time to time, and he's a Minnesota Brass alum, March Cadets, 0304, studied at St. Cloud State University in central Minnesota, went down to Southern Methodist for grad school, and he teaches in Texas now, just outside Dallas-Fort Worth. And the thing that we always talk about is that it doesn't really matter where you are. If you have the right people in the place, you have a program or a plan in place. It always goes back to that idea of a progression.
Mm-hmm.
You have a 3 or 5 year plan. You can make anything happen with kids anywhere. You look at Avon High School. What is Avon, on the map for other than their drumline?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at, obviously California is just littered with amazing groups, as we've already talked about. But you look at some of these other schools that just come out of nowhere, and they're throwing down. New Philadelphia High School last year blew me away.
Was that the Rush show? 2 years ago.
It's the one they had the chains.
Okay.
It was Bound, I believe, was the
Okay.
theme, or something similar to that.
Cool.
And these guys come out, and I'm just shambling through the lot, and I see the truck, and it's New Philadelphia High School, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Keep walking, and then all of a sudden this triplet roll comes out of nowhere and just cuts through my brain, and I turn around with my mouth wide open. I'm drooling all over the parking lot. And I probably stayed there for almost an hour watching these guys warm up, and it just blew me away. I had no idea. They just poof out of the ether, and they're throwing down. I believe they won A-class this past year. And just always, it's one of those things that gives me hope as I move forward in my teaching career. And, I've worked with drumlines for 8 years now, and kind of trying to move to that next stage where you go out and go into a program and you try and not just get in there and be like, oh, that third left diddle is not working, but kind of that more holistic approach, talking about not just skill sets, but how the skill sets relate to what you're doing in the ensemble, what you're doing within the context of the overall production. And, do you need to be heard right now, or where can you fit within what's happening melodically, and
great
things like that.
Yeah, you're teaching music.
Yeah, I love teaching.
Brilliant.
It's great.
I mean, I love teaching flat drag, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, me too.
But I love teaching music even more.
And a little Jedi Knight here and there. Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered, the indoor circuit a little bit. Let's get back to the field, because, God, I know I miss being out on the field right about now.
For sure.
Tom and I both marched this past year with Minnesota Brass in the DCA circuit. Second place, number 1 in performer excellence for percussion. I'm just saying. Yep. It was a really good run. So
it was.
We had a great year, and, we spend so many hours on the bus talking diddles, talking DCA, talking DCI, and man, things have just been crazy in DCI, especially, I feel like, over the last couple of years. I can't figure out for the life of me how the scoring works. I don't understand how I can watch what I'm told is a 7th place drum line, and I feel like it's one of the best lines I've seen since I was born.
Right.
And I just, it just kind of blows my mind, and I know you have some very specific opinions about how things have been going in the DCI community, and want to touch on that.
I love DCI. That's, I think for kids a lot younger than us, some of them have started with WGI, but for our age and certainly older, I mean, DCI was where the highest level was always there.
That was where I started. It was like I knew about the Madison Scouts long before I even knew that like an indoor circuit existed.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as like DCI scoring goes, if we're not talking about percussion, for sure I can't figure stuff out. Right. And I mean, I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. Even though I like to think that I watch from an effect-based standpoint sometimes, or I'm able to, but I don't quite get what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's wrong, just saying I haven't figured it out yet.
Right.
But as far as drums in particular go, I think the level of drumming is higher than it used to be. Mm-hmm. I really honestly think that drumlines are better than they were. They're asked to do a lot more than they were, say, 10, 12 years ago.
And all of you on DCP, I hear you gasping and opening up your browser to write a horrible comment or post or what have you, but yeah, it's just the reality of the situation is, as things evolve, I mean, if you look at basketball players from 1950 to today, nice I think you could say that there's a pretty distinct difference in the athleticism, in the strategy that's involved. It's kind of gone to a whole new level. And I think you're dead on as far as the performance quality is insane. Yeah. And it's really almost, like for me, I look at it as if I'm looking at like a buffet table. You know, I can get some meat and potatoes over here. I can get some fruit over here. I can get. It's just this whole cornucopia of unique styles, unique approaches to the instrument, sounds I never could have imagined.
Totally.
And I guess I don't envy the guys put numbers down on the sheet.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I look at the vast majority of the names that I see judging DCI, and I'm like, that dude's legit. That's sweet. That guy. I mean, whether I can think of groups that he's taught that were legit, or places that he marched when he marched there. I mean, just the things that you do to vet and evaluate people when you don't actually get to sit and critique, or just because I haven't done that before in a DCI setting. So, I just think it's hard. I mean, I have a good friend. Mike Ferry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mike was at DCI this past year, and he was doing some filming for Finale.
That's right.
For Make Music, and he was recording. He got around to just about everybody. Certainly, all of the players that were in contention for the drum trophy, and was taking footage. And he was one. He always has an opinion.
Yeah.
And I think almost always spot on. He's got a great ear. He's got a great eye. He tends to catch things that I don't catch. He points out things all the time. I'm like, you're absolutely right. So I trust him. I believe him, and he is 100% convinced that Cavaliers were the best drum line out there this past year from a clarity standpoint and a demand standpoint. Like both of them, he was like, clarity, no one was cleaner. From a demand standpoint, he was like, devs are probably in the conversation. This is his opinion.
Right.
I'm just further away from it, so like I said, put a lot of stock in it, and he was absolutely convinced that Cavies were better than they were the previous year when they won drums.
Right.
And
Which I got to see them up close at DCI Minnesota about halfway through the year, and they blew my mind.
Really?
It was myself and my good friend Michael Latano went after we performed with Minnesota Brass about halfway through the show, and went and sat, and we were 10 feet away. You know, Mike McIntosh is laying down in front, using the head bag as a pillow, and it was just a great chill vibe. And these guys just had a command of the instrument that I hadn't seen before. I mean, they were all so relaxed and just so in the zone. And that's halfway through the season.
Right.
I mean, it was insane. And then to come to this year, and I remember early on, probably the second week of the season, I had seen a video of them doing a warm-up with some body movement. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to. And those of you that haven't seen it, I will make sure to link to that video when I post this podcast so you guys can check it out.
This is the rolls,
like
the big shimmy.
Yes, with the big, moving the drums around, and they're working pretty much every joint they have in their body.
Right.
And then I see them say, I'm going to get it wrong now because I don't have it in front of me, but somewhere in that like 6, 7, 8 placement overall. 4, 5, 6, And I'm just going, well, let's see. They took what they did last year, and obviously everything changes every year. You can't compare from year to year, but just for the sake of conversation, you see them out there. They're blowing my mind in June in 2011. They come out in 2012. They're doing twice as much easily. Body movement. They're playing tougher beats. There's more space that I don't know how they're counting and getting these cold attacks, and they just descend. Yeah. And it's crazy to me.
Yeah, I agree. And those are sweet.
Yeah,
They had that drum feature with the Excel pulling things.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it looked completely dirty on the page. Like if I saw this in the score, I'd be like, there's no chance they're gonna play this.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I know we're Blue Devils, but come on. And it was. I mean, it sounded good in the movie theater at quarters. I mean, it was. I think they won drums all 3 nights, so it couldn't have been too bad.
I believe so. Yeah.
Blue Coats slamming. Quads in particular were totally slamming.
Our buddy Joey Fowl out there playing quads and
like a man. And just good groups all over. So it was a cool year. Vanguard was sweet.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite last year?
I'm still kind of I really like Ronick beats. So probably Vanguard. I love that this is completely not relevant to the field, but he posts a lot of it. They get a lot of vids posted with the front line and the battery players.
I
love hearing the whole percussion ensemble. Joel Batuzak at Captain and Minnesota Brass loves to get together front and back of the drumline ensemble and play their show beats together. And I'm kind of partial to hearing that full ensemble and So there are always a lot of vids of Vanguard doing that. So that's part of it. I get to appreciate the front and the back relationship.
Right, absolutely.
But love his beats. Yeah, they're probably my favorite line last year.
Yeah.
If we're talking entire ensemble.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. The other thing that we were talking about as far as DCI goes, DCI I think is being influenced scoring wise from WGI, specifically the percussion caption, because a lot of times you look at the recaps for DCI, and if you look at the ordinals, it's like 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 2 2 2 2
right.
3 3 3 3 3, except for when you get to the percussion caption and it's like 4 7 6 6 3 2
1 5 3. It's like what?
Which I think.
And those of you that want to see a perfect example of that, go to DCI Finals 2012 recap.
Yeah.
Scroll over, click on the percussion area, and it'll highlight that entire section for you. Just peruse down there, and it's not just in the top,
right.
8 to 12. It's all the way down. It's all over for the most part.
Yeah,
obviously.
For the most part, absolutely. And I think I know WGI. It's part of what they kind of preach in their judging rubric is that on any given night, groups can flip flop. If you're within a tenth or 2/10, that judge is basically communicating to the group that's 2/10 down that if your shows were to flip flop from if it's an effect judge, in effect, like if I get something that I didn't, or from PA, if you hit those rolls and they miss those rolls, it's absolutely flip floppable.
Right.
And I think it's really cool. At first, I was a little surprised because again I was used to DCI. I grew up where it was the norm to be like 1 1 1 1.
Right. The old adage of slotting that comes up every year.
Yeah, and as I've grown more intimately involved with the WGI rubric and how they evaluate things, I think it's well laid out, and I think it's a perk actually for kids to feel like they have a shot. It feels more like the members are actively involved in the outcome than, say, at the DCI level, where it just feels like the designers, they really determine where you place in a lot of ways. I mean, that certainly does happen in WGI to an extent, but there's just more of a performer responsibility that correlates to the number, which I think promotes growth. It promotes kids to want to be the best bass 4 that he could possibly be.
Right.
I mean, you should already be teaching that. That should already be a part of your teaching ethic, that you want to be the best that you could be, but it's just another fact. It's another motivator. It's another way to get kids to be good.
Well, and I think bouncing off of that, that's really a byproduct of the intensity of the summer season, in my opinion. I mean, when you move in, you got your everydays, and then you're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months essentially.
Right.
And you're on the road, and everybody is playing really clean by the time they get to finals. I mean, and I think that's where, especially traditionally, that's where whoever the percussion director or battery arranger, front ensemble arrangers, etc., that's where that really came in. And then WGI, there's so much more room for subjectivity because there's such a wide variety. I mean, it's not like everybody's out there and, they're two-piece uniform, they got their Shaco or their Aussie or their helmet. I'll give you that. Mike Brown, if you're listening, yes, I said helmet, you're welcome. And there's still a certain status quo that you have to adhere to, and it creates a lot more clearly defined areas to determine, obviously this is better than this. But I feel like in WGI especially, and I'd love to dig in a little deeper with your judging experience and just get your take on this. There's such a diverse array of skill sets being shown. You've got people creating body movement that you may or may not have ever seen before. I saw a guy last year at WGI Championships, comes out on stilts, he's got an 8-foot scythe, he's playing a demon character. I can't remember the name of the group right now. I believe they're from Nebraska.
402.
402. Yep, there it is. Thank you. Insane. And at that point, if I'm a judge, even if I'm not in effect, and this is why I'm not a judge, obviously, I'm sitting there doing PA and I see the guy come out on the side, I can't think about anything but the guy on stilts, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So what I want to pick at your brain a little bit is how do you and I'm sure a lot of this is covered throughout the training process, but how do you look at two groups, totally different, coming from totally different angles? One's about light, one's about dark, one's about, clowns, and one's about, Anne Frank in the attic, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And then on top of that, so that's a GE question, really.
Sure.
And then getting into the PA stuff, how do you determine, well, these guys played triplet rolls with an eighth note bass at 140, and it was clean. These guys played at, 180, 190, a little gray skis, but they did it. Who gets more credit for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess there's two questions in there. Feel free to jump on whatever one
let's see. We'll do the GE one first.
Cool.
Although I think I take that back. Let's answer the question for both. The rubric, I think it starts with the rubric. It starts with the criteria that that's on the front and back of the sheets, and then there's like supplementary information that comes along with that in the WGI manual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that really applies to both, and it's the judge's ability to internalize that information so that they're not looking down at the sheet while the show is happening to go, is it communication? Yeah, that's communication, and then they say communication on the tape. It's like just to know the words, to have them kind of just built in. I think that's where you get your separators, or where a good judge does separation. The one thing that I see happen a lot, that I think, like my judges trainer, Chris Heston, tries to steer judges away from, is just using your own like personal taste as their guiding factor. Really, like that's not what you do. That should not be your primary focus. Like your goal should be to internalize. The judge's goal should be to internalize the rubric so much so, because their personal taste is going to come out. Like
one way or another.
Yeah, my personal taste is going to show up in the number. It's going to show up in the ordinal.
Yeah.
When I go to a show, I try to distance myself from that as much as I can, because I already know it's going to bleed into whatever's going on.
Right.
So I want to honor the rubric that was given out to every drumline staff, that is created and recreated and updated from a year in and year out basis. So I mean, they have rules committee. I mean, there's a reason the rubric exists, and I think the goal for every WGI judge should be internalizing. I think what's the phrase that is in the business world? Unconsciously competent, is that what they say? Or
right.
I don't know if that's right, where it's conscious competency, where you either. No, I'm not going to break that down. That's going to take too long. If you know what we're talking about, you know what we're talking about. If you don't,
Google it, kid. You'll figure it out.
Not question. I have it. Wait, no.
Ask Jeeves, son. Alta Vista.
Sure. Yeah. Nice. So I think that's to answer your question on both ends. I actually do really like the PA caption. For me, that's where I have the most fun. I feel the most natural. I think that's where judges usually, music guys should start out, because again, when you're attracted to this activity initially, it's kind of for the nuts and bolts. It's for the precision,
Right.
At least for drummers who come in this activity. Like, we love the OCD quality of that roll was so clean, or that one little bit wasn't clean. Like, and we talk about it later. Like, you and I could probably just talk about clean and dirty beats.
Exactly.
Maybe that's what we're doing, but for hours on end. So so for PA, I think the thing that I promote is equity in sections. Make sure that you value all of the sections, giving them somewhat not equal value, but making sure that you have sampled them. I think that all too often a judge will get fixated on a particular section for good or bad.
Snare line.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. As the most obvious example.
Right.
And I think, sampling is definitely, it's in the rubric. It's there's a quality through caption. I wish I could remember the expression. I'm not unconsciously competent when it comes to the verbiage of sampling. But
bitten by your own snake there.
Yeah, absolutely. 1 minute later after bringing it up. So, but sampling is a huge thing, and I feel like a lot of times I see groups where their cymbal line and their bass line were absolutely jamming, but their snare line was not, and they get 5 pointed at a regional or at a nationals competition by sweet snare line.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, you've heard that before, where it's like the snare line's all that matters out of WGI.
Yeah, and you hear the same thing about DCI and DCA. DCA comes up a lot.
Yeah.
I know when you talk with other guys when you're out, especially at major competitions, when we travel out to Bridgeport or to Pennsylvania or what have you.
Yeah, which is a shame. I mean,
but I think what you brought up, and I was going to ask you more specifically, for young instructors or young writers, arrangers, what they should be looking for. And I think that idea of sampling, even if you have a weak section, find a way to highlight them so that they can still get that equal recognition. It may be a more simple part, but what is the personality of that section?
Yeah.
Are they kind of goofy kids? Maybe they, maybe they need to do a weird dance while they're playing their quarter note cymbal break. Right. That could be enough.
Yeah, showing success, I think, is huge, regardless of their talent level or their inclination. I think that's a really good point. I think that all of the percussion designer instructors in the activity should try very hard to find ways to show achievement in every section.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard the counter argument. It's like right to your strong points. I know Mapes is a huge fan of that. I heard him talk about a group that he taught that like won a medal or won a class one year, and one of the sections just didn't have a feature, and it was just because they weren't very good, and so he only used them in supporting spots the whole show, and the rest of the ensemble was good enough that he, air quotes, got away with it.
Right.
So I understand that. I understand the motivation. It's I would argue that from an education first standpoint, you're limiting them
their experience
as performers, and they'll know, because they know that they don't have a future.
Right.
And maybe they're cool with it, but probably they want a lick.
Right. Yeah. Everybody wants to get on the DVD at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's about values and about making choices.
So, Tom, I want to know, as obviously as a judge, it's going to be a little bit of your own personal bias goes into it. It has to. It's a subjective activity.
Sure.
You can't be 100% objective, otherwise there'd be no reason for us to do the thing. So I want to know, what are things that make you kind of cringe when you're up in the box, or even if you're not judging, if you just go to a show, you go to a regional, you're watching some stuff, and you just go, what just happened? Why did that happen? Anything that just strikes you, or things, and on the flip side of that, what are things that have really blown you away over the last couple of years, advancements in the activity?
Okay. We'll start with the things, the cringeworthies. I think locally, tuning tends to be something that holds a lot of groups back. I'm surprised that people come out with pretty abrasive sounding drums, like snares that are high and way out of the range of the rest of the ensemble, basses that are low and aren't dry enough, especially in we don't have a lot of big venues. We don't have any big venues.
We have zero.
Yeah, our finals is at a pretty boomy gym. I mean, it's a big gym, but it's pretty boomy. So I think there's a lot that can be done as far as battery tuning with a lot of ensembles, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to buy the new fancy Mapex or Tama drums.
Right.
You can you don't even necessarily need to replace all of the heads, but you just need to be more mindful, ask questions, look at the groups that are at the top, and if I'm a snare tech at Foley High School,
right.
I would walk up to Nick Marino, Mike Ferry, and be like, Nick Taco Edwards, and be like, how do you get the snares to sound like that? And or maybe like, could you come in? I'll buy you Coke after the rehearsal just to tweak the tuning. I think that would go a long way.
Absolutely. There's also a ton of resources online now. I've got bookmarked probably 5 videos of Mike McIntosh going through step by step. He's talking about tuning guts and everything.
We should maybe put those somewhere on the...
Definitely.
Get Vlad Boz on it. He loves to put things on the NPA website.
Absolutely.
He's the webmaster for the NPA website. He is a champ at that and loves to just put resources up. So
those of
I don't think they're there.
Those of you that aren't familiar with Minnesota Percussion Association and are currently navigating to that site, you can thank one Vladislav Boz for putting that together. has really changed the face of the circuit over the last couple of years, and he's done a fantastic job, along with a couple other board members, of outreach and kind of starting to get us recognized. It helps that the talent level's on the rise too.
Totally.
So.
Totally.
Yeah. So snare tuning, bass tuning.
Yeah, tuning is a big thing, and then I don't know. I think there are a lot of resources where you can purchase a show at inexpensively. I would maybe encourage some of the younger instructors in the circuit to take a look at that from like Box 6, from organizations that are. There are some more companies now that are producing really nice shows.
Yeah.
And you can learn a lot just from teaching someone else's show. I understand totally the desire, the want to write your own show.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a big, huge motivator for people to get into the teaching side of it.
To express themselves and kind of prove themselves as a creative force.
Absolutely. I guess my counter to that would be there is time for that, and even a year or two, a season or two where you tried teaching someone else's writing style that is, that's what they do for a living and have been doing for a living for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You'll probably get a lot out of that. The groups that I know that bought shows in the last couple of years, I think they really felt like it was more of a relief than anything.
Yeah.
They didn't have to worry about that. All they had to worry about was training, and then they got to kind of absorb the composition throughout the course of the season. So I don't know if it fits in groups' budgets. I certainly get the instructors' pull to want to write.
Well, and one of the nice things I recently talked with a young instructor that took on a new position, and the expectation was that he would come up with the entire show concept, he'd write all the music, or find a way to get music.
Yep.
And we talked a lot about looking at these prepackaged shows, and the thing that I explained to him was you can customize it however you want. If you feel comfortable writing a Vish package and doing drill and body movement, just buy the beats. Right. You buy the front ensemble, or
That's pretty common.
Yeah, or like if you're really confident and you really you just need to write some battery beats, you need some 5-lit chug it of cheese, whatever. Go for that. Buy the pit book, buy the Vish book, and then you still only spend. I've seen some range from $500 up to $1,600, depending on how much stuff you get.
Yeah.
And some of those you can get a floor design, you can get a uniform design. I mean, it's so comprehensive if you want it to be. And I've written or been a part of writing 7 shows, and there's only one that I like. And I'm not going to say which one for any of my former students that are listening to this, but just know that of all of you out there, some of you were part of my favorite show that I wrote. So there's this one show I like, but the rest of it took me, let's say, between 5 and 7 years to learn how to write that one decent show, and then I haven't really been able to capture that magic since. So I am a huge proponent of the prepackaged shows at this point, and especially with the amount of variety. If you have kids that are into a certain thing, you can go buy a show that directly relates to their interests, and bam, you just upped your recruiting 200%.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Very
so
cool.
we're on the same page there. And as far as nationally, I get frustrated when shows shut down what they're doing just to have battery break, and I think that's a personal taste. Although I could certainly apply that to the rubric in a couple of different ways, as far as like the flow of orchestration, just the composition, how it progresses. But I think that's just a staple out there that it shows the athleticism. Yeah. I mean, it's a type of effect,
right?
But I think it's one that's still getting overused, even though people more and more are aware that it is a one-dimensional effect.
Yep, and diminishing returns if things start going bad during your 1-minute snare break.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and again, there are effective ways to use it, but I think it gets a little bit overused, and that's a personal thing, partially. As far as stuff that I really like, I love when electronics are used maturely. I love when kind of the flip side, I love when a break gets augmented and feels like it does fit within the greater context.
Yes.
That's fantastic. When I see a line pull up and either there's a lone voice coming from up front, whether it's in the keyboards or it's in the electronics, whatever. But it feels like there's still momentum from the greater composition. That's fantastic. That feels so good, and I think that's what the really, really high level groups they commit to doing.
Yeah.
I'm talking like Independent World all the way.
Right.
So.
And the way they layer those effects is just.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very smart, very mature. Those guys, all those groups have been doing this activity for a long time. So.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I can think of as far as that goes.
Do you believe there's a WGI formula for a perfect show? 30 seconds then this, 45 seconds then this?
No, I don't. But I think there is things to be learned by. There are things that work. I wouldn't go crazy looking for the formula because I don't think it exists. But I do think that there are things that work and that you see over and over again. You see a lot of single voice or sparse orchestration from a battery while you're getting most of the sounds from the front line. I think that when you're in a small gym, it seems to make sense to go marimba plus snare or whatever. Just like you write in a lot. I think DCI does that a fair amount, where it's like a lone brass voice, a lone percussion voice. But I see a lot of the top groups. They use a single battery voice and the entire front ensemble contributing, and I think that's something that people don't catch sometimes, especially I think up here, because we just think of it as a smaller picture, where the marimba plus snare voice fills up the small gym, but you go to Nutter and you sound teeny tiny. Yeah. So
Tinker Toys.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and especially with the way the new rules they passed, so that you can control electronics from the stand, and you've got, if you really want to, you can pull that entire front ensemble miking down so that it bounces out on the fly.
Nice.
So
yeah, good point.
That's a good way to.
So that's a few things as far as that goes.
Very cool, Tom. Tell me how Summer Drum Corps is made to piss you off. And not even you specifically. Maybe you specifically, but we're going to find out.
All right. This is something that I feel strongly about having marched this past summer. For those of you who don't know, I marched quads at Minnesota Brass. The beauty of all-age corps is that as long as you can physically handle it, you are able to march. And you can make the line, you are able to march. So I got the opportunity to march for the first time since '03. And I never realized how agitating the activity is. As a member, you are out in the hot sun, you are dehydrated, you are asked to do things that are mentally draining, that are physically draining. You are asked to do them over and over and over again, even if you played them very well the first time or the first couple of times. Plus, on top of that, you are constantly getting told changes, so even when you get starting to feel comfortable on something, and suddenly it's different. And then you have someone following you around, pointing out all of your errors to you over and over again, and they're small errors, they're not even big errors. I had a great summer, but man, I was pissed off. I was pissed off so much of the time on the field, and it was fleeting. I let it go. But I mean, I'm old enough that I feel like I'm pretty sure I can let stuff roll off my back. In the world, I do that all the time. But on the field, I was so mad. My techs, I just wanted to wring their throats.
Right.
The box, I would be like, you come down here and put these quads on, and we'll see how it goes.
We'll see what's up.
It was amazing to me to realize, having taken a step back away from the activity, I come back to it and be like, this whole thing is set up to piss me off.
Right.
And we pay. It's not like we get paid for it. We pay in to do it. Yeah.
All good things, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a fantastic time. As long as my greater life, the specifics of my life don't change in any dramatic way, I want to march again. I want to march until my body says no, or something else comes up that's too good to pass up. But I loved marching this past year. It was better than I thought it was going to be. My back held up better than I thought it would. And those Dynasty quads are not light.
No.
And I'm not a big guy.
Right. You are a waif of a man.
But it went better than I could have ever imagined. And at the same time, I was pissed off.
Did you feel that way back 03, 02, 01?
I remember you mean just being agitated?
Yeah.
I think so, but I never...
Or do you think, like, maybe because you were younger then, you didn't really... You've had a lot more life experience now.
Yeah.
You look at... You're an adult, and you look at things differently, obviously. But
I think that it was there the whole time. But I don't think I ever really... I don't think I ever summed it up, and I ever really looked at it as clearly as I did this past year, where I was like, this whole thing is just pissing me off.
Mm-hmm.
It's making me so mad
right.
by design.
Mm-hmm.
What are we all doing out here? Like, just thinking it was incredible that so many of us are out there on fields all over the country constantly doing that.
Yeah. Well, and really it's you saying that, especially talking about having the tech swarming around, guys from the box calling you out for, you like slip, and it's like, hey, old man, you going to make it through the next rep or what? Right. It's like, you start getting wound up, and I just thought immediately of Office Space. Like, do you know I have 8 bosses? And it's like, and all of them are talking about the first left goddamn hill. Like, what? Oh, yeah, I know. I definitely felt more of that this year than I did the last year. In 2011, that was my first time ever being on a football field.
Crazy.
Marching.
Crazy.
Because my high school program did not have that. It was parade band,
mm-hmm.
and those of you outside of the Midwest probably don't know what that is, but basically you do attempt at this point in time to do field shows in the middle of the street. Let me tell you, folks, it doesn't work. It doesn't work, never has, never will. They're going to keep trying until we run out of parades to do, but
pretty silly.
Yeah, but that first year on the field, I was just in constant fear. I'm one in on the end of the snare lines. My first time. All these other guys that have marched DCI before, sometimes multiple years of DCI, and I was scared to death. But now this past year, I got a little more confidence, a little more relaxed, and then you start noticing things like, why do we have 30 seconds of downtime just standing here with these drums on? Can we get some water? It's freaking hot out here, man.
Right.
Like, I'm already salty. It's 10 a.m. We just started an hour and a half ago. What's going on?
10 a.m. Salty.
Things, or like my favorite, and something that a technique I've actually used before to discipline students, and I realize now what a horrible idea it is. The people that did their job, let's say, brought their set books that day.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are going to go run for the people that didn't bring their set books.
Yep.
As an adult, I'm going on 30 in a couple of months here. That was the most, as I'm running, this is the most ludicrous thing I've ever done in my life. And when I get back there, I'm going to punch that guy in the face as hard as I can.
Mike Brown was so mad. Mike Brown, Mikey, that was awesome. I loved it. I was like, oh my God, I think he's going to freak out. Yep. I think he's actually going to freak out.
We were close. It was real close.
It was awesome.
And that definitely, that soured a good part. I mean, obviously you get to lunch, all things are forgiven.
Yeah.
That's all you need is a sandwich.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how that rolls off.
Yeah, but that, things like that. But other than that, I don't know, I can't complain too much. I thought, all things considered, we had a show that was a skeleton of what it ended up being at the beginning of the season. I mean, it was bare bones, and yes, we had to change constantly. I mean, there's maybe one hold I can think of that didn't have body movement added to it in the ballad, and that was pretty much it.
Right.
And it really evolved over time, and as frustrating as it was at points, I mean, the fact that we managed to achieve as high a level of quality as we did was nothing short of miraculous. I mean, obviously we had the horses for it, but getting all those strong personalities together and
that was a tremendous success of the year.
Yeah,
that we were one of the better brass drum lines. I mean, for those of you who haven't experienced Minnesota brass, take it for what it's worth. But we do drumline pretty good up here when we're good. And that was one of the best brass drum lines.
Yeah.
I've been around, I think, for all the good ones since it went up a level probably in 99, 98 was, okay, now we're getting really nerdy.
Right.
But 98 was the sea change where a bunch of young guys came in. 99 it started to really get going. And ever since then, 03, 04 were both super good lines.
Yeah.
2009, I think the best drum line. Most people, I think, because we sit around and talk about which one was drum line is best.
Yeah.
2010, I think, is the consensus, and I think last year was right in the mix with those groups.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree. So cool, man. Well, I think it pretty much covered everything. Is there anything you can think of that you would want to get out there?
I don't think so, other than I think it's tremendous and amazing. If any of you have made it to the end of this podcast, thank you for taking the time out of your day and listening. And I hope that you took something away that you're you feel like you've bettered yourself in some way as an educator, or just into the marching arts. And you too. I appreciate you seeking me out and want to talk to her more.
I want to thank Tom Reimer for being my guest today. First interview on the Rudimentality podcast. It's been a fantastic experience. And before we go, is there anything you want to plug? You got a show coming up or anything that some of your students or anything like that?
I don't think so. I mean, I could, but I feel like if I pick one, I'm going to leave others out. I will say that part of what I do is, or one of my ethics as far as being an educator, a judge, being involved in the community, is I want to be as open and available to people as possible. So if you listen to this, you want to talk drums, my email address, I'm sure you could put it on there.
Yep, we'll definitely have it.
It's Tom, T-H-O-M, Burton, B-U-R-T-O-N, 612 @gmail.com. And, I like to be open. As the head judge in NPA, I want to talk to instructors who want to know more about the rubric, more about how we get to numbers. If it's parents or it's, I love to have an open conversation with anybody who's interested in. I mean, we just sat here and talked for an hour and a half like it was no big deal.
We didn't even get into all the stuff we could do.
Right.
I mean,
I feel like we missed stuff.
We could do years on, we could just watch YouTube videos and talk about it all day pretty much.
Right. Yeah, we didn't even talk trash about anybody.
I know. God, well, you know what? That's part two. We just save that for next time, buddy.
All right, so yeah.
Definitely hit him up. Find Tom Reimer. His email will be listed on the same page as this podcast. And please come back soon. We're going to be trying to do these interviews as frequently as possible. I've got 4 or 5 more lined up right now, and we'll kind of release those as they're done, being edited and cleaned up. If you suffered through the audio quality today, do not fear. New equipment is on the way, and it will just keep on getting better from here. So please check back, rudimentality.com. Find us on Facebook. Find us online. You can Google us, or just go to rudimentality.com and keep on drumming, man.